In this video, we're going to cover the Hubble Enterprise Role-Based Access Control feature that provides role-based access control not only for the Hubble CLI, whether we're speaking to the Hubble Relay or Timescape, but also the Hubble UI as well. So let's dive into that. In my demo environment, I've already set up my OIDC provider. So when I go to my Hubble UI web address for the UI, you can see straight away that it's asking me to sign in with my OpenID Connect details. So let's do that now. So we're going to log in as the admin at example.com. And once I've logged in, I can see all of the parameters that I have access to, all that data as well. So I click through flows, and because I'm the administrator, I can see all of the namespaces as well. And one of the things that you will notice changing when this is set up is that in the bottom left-hand corner here, you will see my username being added as well. So I'm going to log quickly back out there. If we move into my Visual Studio Code editor, let's have a look at some of the configurations that make this possible. So from a Hubble Enterprise point of view, we're setting up in those Helm values the RBAC configurations. We're ensuring that it's enabled. We're setting up where that OIDC is configured. So in my environment, I'm using DEX today, and I've actually configured this using self-signed certificates as well, just to make my life easier. So we've also had to provide where they are from a trust point of view as well. The other meaningful configuration that we have is the policy settings. This sets up the user access to that API. When we create this with Hubble Enterprise, we read that policy information from a configuration map. That configuration map can either be created as part of your Hubble Enterprise installation, or you have the ability to provide it out of band. But if you do that, then the Hubble Enterprise pods will sit in an initialization status until that configuration map is available. One of the other specific callouts for setting up RBAC as well is that you will need to enable TLS between your Hubble components as well. So again, please consult that enterprise documentation for those details. From a policy point of view, going back into that configuration, we set up the bindings themselves. So we set up role names and we set up the value of how they apply as well. So for my DEX configuration, you can see that we're applying this to the values of the email addresses that users send in, and then the role as well. In the role specification, we're then specifying the name of the role, what the rules are, so what actions are available on the data itself, and what kinds of data types are available. So we can see here for my admin, we've got access to absolutely everything. For a demo user, we've got access to pull the data using GET for a particular namespace as well. So actually what I'm going to do in my environment is I'm going to look at this new values YAML file that I've set up for my Helm install, and I've actually created a new user in my DEX environment called tenant jobs dev. And we're going to specify a new binding for that against that email address. And inside of that role here, we can see that we're going to give it access to flow data in the context of the namespace values. If I wanted, I could even give it additional namespace access as well, just by tabbing down there and creating an additional value as well. So we'll just get rid of that. So let's upgrade my environment. Okay, so now that's gone through, let's have a look at where it actually creates that configuration as well. So we actually create a config map, which is called Hubble RBAC policy. Okay, so let's look at where we create that policy configuration. We actually do that inside of a config map in where the same namespace where Hubble Enterprise is installed. So if I paste this line in here, and I'm going to use JQ just so we can get that particular data. So the data that's inside that config map is called Hubble RBAC policy YAML, and then we specify our YAML configuration in there. So it's taking that from that Helm install values file. Okay, so let's go back to my UI now. So I'm just going to give this a quick refresh, and I'm going to now log in with my tenant jobs dev account. Okay, so I've logged in. I can still see that health of the overall platform. If I click on flows, we can see I've only got access to a single namespace. Just wait for that to quickly load some data. And now we can see the same information that we expect to see when I had access to the full system as well. I'm just still building that flow map as we bring those flows from the Hubble relay ring buffer as well. Okay, so what actually happens if we move back into the CLI? The UI is not the only way to consume this data. So if I clear there. So one of the things that I'm going to do first and foremost is we need to log into the environment. So I'm going to paste this command in. Because I'm using that self-signed certificate, I'm having to also tell it where the issuer CA is for it to trust it. Otherwise, it won't meet the validation providers. And I'm also providing where my issuer is to log in as well. So where is that depth environment? I'm going to run that. It's going to load up again into here for me. I'm now going to log back in as that tenant users in that namespace. So we can see now I'm authorized. If I go back through into my window, you can see now we've got a token and when it's valid until. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to set where my Hubble server is with an export command. So I'm actually just port forwarding to the Hubble relay at the moment, but because we rely on the TLS to enable the RBAC feature, I also need to set it to speak to the Hubble relay server as TLS as well. Okay, so the first command I'm going to run is because we already know from the UI I don't actually have access to any other namespace than the cubes, than the tenant jobs namespace. I'm actually going to try and pull data from a different namespace. So for the Hubble observe command, again, I'm going to specify the details because I'm using them self-signed certificates of where the TLS certificates are and the server name that we're expecting to be called. But more importantly here, we're filtering on that cube system namespace. And we can see here that the permission is denied because I don't have access to it. Let's run another command, but again in this tenant jobs namespace where we do know I can pull that data, but I'm just going to filter on DNS requests there as well. And as you can see, I pull data back because I do have access to that. And then very quickly, what we're actually going to do here is I'm just going to log out. I'm going to log back in again, but we're just going to authenticate as that administrative user again. So it's opened up another window for me here. Oh, let's get rid of one password there. And we're authorized again. And then let's just make sure we can access that cube system namespace again. Flows, which we can. So just to kind of round off the end of this demo, because I've shown you kind of how we access and set it up at the Hubble Enterprise component level, which is where most of the policy access as well. From a Hubble UI point of view, we set up our OAuth so that we can, where it allows domains from, more importantly, where our issue is from and where to redirect back to. And also, again, the provider CA details, because again, I'm using self-signed certs in my environment managed by Cert Manager, but potentially in your environment, you have different CAs that you'd want to configure as well. And our enterprise documentation takes you through a number of options with that. And then finally, if I go to my Hubble timescape values, because Hubble can be deployed standalone, so it can be deployed outside of your Kubernetes cluster, so not in the same namespace as Hubble Enterprise. You also have a full RBAC policy mode in Hubble timescape, and you can pull details from there as well. And as you can see from these Helm values, essentially the configuration of this looks very similar to Hubble Enterprise as well, setting that same config map, setting bindings, setting the roles in place as well. And that wraps up our very short demo on the Hubble Enterprise role-based access control feature. Thank you very much.